your van garage.
I'll call the meeting to order at 7 o'clock, which is our routine. I'd like to welcome our guests. It's Sarah and Kim, right? Got that? Carol?
Yes.
Oh, I got it. And your husband is? Paul. Now, some of you are spouses, so I won't introduce you. But I think you know where you belong, right? Mike's a member. Aaron is a spouse, and Ernie is a spouse of Diane. Okay. I'll wait till the chimes are down. That's a beautiful clock Dorothy donated to us, and came in handy tonight because they have my phone here, and I can't look at the time, so it worked out good. How do I introduce Pete Desoto? Many of you need no introduction to Pete because you have known Pete for many years. To many of us, he is a friend. He left the area about 13 years ago, but it doesn't seem that long because he comes back for special occasions, like flying from Florida for my dad's 50th birthday party. You really surprised my dad. He couldn't stop talking about it. For those of you who don't know Pete, I just want to say he has done much for the area, many things anonymously. And without further ado, as they say, I'll turn the meeting over to Pete.
The other stranger here is my son Mike.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mike.
You're not introducing spouses when you
We'll introduce kids, we're not introducing spouses, right? Well, I'm very proud of my kids. Randy, who's the oldest, was a West Point kid, and then he went to law school, and now he's a political writer and it's not liberal. Randy's fairly conservative. His idea of Barry Goldwater was probably a communist. But anyway, so he writes for a conservative blog site called Western Journalism, and he's their only full-time staff writer. The other writers they use get paid, so much an article or whatever. So, and Randy loves to write, and he is a good writer. So and then of course Mike and Matt, they run MI, along with of course a dedicated team that they work with. But Mike and Matt are the two that make it happen every day. Mike lives in Prescott, Arizona. Matt lives in Millersburg. And I have one other thing I have to say before I get into this, that behind every successful person that's married, there's another person. In today's world, it could be the wife is the most obvious successful and the husband stay at home, or in our case it was Pete and Carol. And Carol was very successful in her own right. She had her own nursery school and daycare centers. And more importantly, we wouldn't have been able to accomplish the things that MI accomplished without having a willing partner. So while we're not married today, certainly Carol was a very important part of the success of MI. And so I want to be clear of that. It's only fair to talk about that. So I thought that it would be, first of all, very few people really know that MI was really a Florida company. And so I'll give you a little history of the people that founded MI, which is not me, and where they came from. And I think that kind of helps tell a little bit about the culture. So the company goes back to the end of World War II. Yeah, these two guys that started MI were two guys. One guy's named James T. Walker, but he always went by Toki. And he never would admit how he got the name Toki. And finally, one time I was able to meet his sister, who was a little older than him. And she said, well, I started calling Toki because I just couldn't pronounce James. And when she was just a little toddler, you know, and he came along, and she called him Toki, and that name stuck with him too. And he died at 90 years old, and he was still Toki Walker. So Toki Walker and Robert Word, they became friends while they were teaching Navy ROTC cadets to fly at the University of Georgia in Marietta, Georgia. And so that kept them out of the as they used to say, that kept them out of the marching army, because they were already pilots, already flight instructors prior to the war starting. Navy needed these guys to do that more than the Army needed them marching around carrying guns. And then about 1943, by that time the Navy had enough of their own instructors and they didn't need them anymore, so they released them. And they then were lucky enough to get a job flying B-29 airplanes. This was the most powerful, biggest airplane in the world. And their job was to taste these things on test flights. So they were under contract from Boeing, being made in Georgia. And they were already in Georgia, and that's how they got the job. So here they are, two guys, up to now, been flying airplanes with about 65 horsepower and a wooden prop and cloth wings, cloth fuselage made on tubes, right? And all of a sudden they're getting into this biggest, most powerful airplane ever made in the world. And that was the training they had. Get in, fly it. They'd fly them up to Kentucky, right down the squawks, fly them back. Bell Aircraft would fix the squawks, turn them over to the Army Air Force. They only ever made one flight prior to turning them over. The interesting sidelight to that is, about 15 years ago, we had the opportunity to take Mr. Walker for a ride in a B-29. At that time, there was only one flying. Now there's two left over from World War II. And so we got him in, it was Fifi's the name of that airplane. Got him in the airplane and we flew from Gainesville, Florida, or Brooksville to Georgia, I forgot where in Georgia. And we got there, got out of the airplane, and it was kind of exciting. And I asked Toki, so what'd you think, you know, getting in the B-29 and having a chance to, he actually got the controls again a little bit and everything. He said, you know, there's a reason there's only one still flying. So, he said that they typically only ever expected them to last about 100 hours. They had so much trouble with them. Even though they were fantastic airplanes, they did have a lot of technical problems. Anyway, so then the war ended, now what? So, you know, first they were, as kids, they were flight instructors, and then they worked for the Navy, then they were flying these B-29s, and then the war ends, and they end up in Clearwater, Florida, both of them, and they are running a little teeny airport in Clearwater, which is really still a little teeny airport. And then their only real revenue comes from teaching people to fly. Well, the GI Bill at the end of World War II was paying for people to get retrained. Well, after about a year and a half of that, somebody in the government finally woke up and said, wait a minute, we're paying to teach people how to fly airplanes when there's literally thousands of unemployed pilots coming back from World War II, so they cut it off. Now all of a sudden, that was their real source of income, was doing that. Well, one of their students was a guy, interesting guy. He had worked for Procter & Gamble, and when they invented the process to make frozen orange juice. And he wanted to learn how to fly. And so they were teaching him how to learn how to fly, and they said he was so nervous, he shaked that bad when he was flying that they really didn't need to put gas in the engine, the wings would That was their story about him. But anyway, he took a liking to these two guys starving to death trying to make a living on this little airport. He brought in a little aluminum frame window screen and six screen. This was a new product. This was 1947. And And he said, here, you guys need to make these, because they're starting to make aluminum windows all over the country. And also, the wood window guys don't want to use wood screens anymore. They want to use their wood to make windows, not screens. They make these aluminum screens. Well, they said, okay, good idea. So they took the thing in the back of the hangar, took it apart. And by the way, here's where you buy the stuff. Here's where you buy the mesh. Here's where you buy the frame. They went in the screen business. At first, they were actually just selling them around town to local people, you know, get new screens. And then they started selling them to aluminum window guys in Florida and aluminum window guys in Indiana and other places around the country. So that got them in the screen business. So when I met them, that was the only business they had. And they had one plant in Clearwater and one in California. Toki Walker's wife was bugging him because he didn't have any hobbies except go to work. He had quit flying. He didn't want to bother with it anymore. And so she convinced him that, why don't you become a ham radio guy? And so I ended up, like a lot of young teenagers also, got involved in ham radio stuff. And so I met Toki at the local ham radio club. Didn't know who he was, didn't know that they had a business or anything. And then one day I read in the newspaper that this guy that I met at the ham radio club had built this new factory. I thought, wow, they must need more people to work there. I was 16, and so I kept bugging him for a job. And he said, okay, and eventually, and so my job was to clean the restrooms. And they hadn't cleaned them in about 3 or 4 months. You can imagine what they look like. So I passed that test. And then eventually I was able to move on and be in the packing department after I got the restrooms cleaned. So that's a little bit about how MI got in the screen business. And it was an interesting opportunity for me because even as a kid, he gave me a lot of responsibility, a lot of different opportunities to do things that you probably wouldn't give a kid today. And that worked out really good. So then along comes about 1960. A guy walks, it's funny how people change your life, you know. A guy walks in their business with a grill, you know, that like you put on the wall or the floor or the ceiling for hot air or cold air to come out of. And Florida was just getting into making houses with central air conditioning then, you know. And he said, you need to make these. And this one's made out of steel, you need to make them out of aluminum. Because in the South here, and you know, now that, you know, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, you know, the real southern states, eastern Texas, very humid climate, a lot of moisture in the air. If you have a steel grill with the air coming out of it, it's going to rust. So you make them out of aluminum. And they really became the premier aluminum grill manufacturers for years. They did. And so the Florida operation became consumed with that business. It was growing very fast. They were making it, they were selling as fast as they could make them. And they just disregarded the screen business. Well, meanwhile, the California operation stayed in the screen business. So when I graduated from college and then had to go in the Army for a while and then got out of the Army, they sent me to California. And they said, I want you to go out there and let's start reviving the screen business. And so the idea was we would open up screen plants across the country and try to keep them closer to where the other window guys were, right? So we would have to be the supplier that would be close by. And so we kept building these screen plants across the country. And so when I was I moved to California, stayed there a year, then moved to St. Louis, got that one going, met a guy in Kansas City, Missouri, that was a branch of a Pennsylvania company that was located right down on the Carlisle Pike called Capital Products Corporation. And Capital Products is a was a really large aluminum window company. So I met the founder and the president of Capital, and he told me, he said, look, if you want our screen business, you gotta come up here. Be within about 30 to 50 miles. Don't be more than 50, don't be closer than 30. He said, I don't want you too close because we have the United Steelworkers, and you don't want them in your screenplay. So he said, no. So he said, I'll help you find a place. He said, what I'm gonna do is he called PP&L, and PP&L had a business development department in those days. And so I met the guy, and we started going around to all the towns that were about 30 miles away from this plant on the Carlisle Pike. And Eville, the Romberg building, which is now 1/4 the size it used to be, was available. Eddie Romberg was still alive, and he wanted to rent it, and so it was available. Of all the other places we looked, Eville seemed like the best, and so that's how we ended up in Eville. Meantime, ultimately, we built the screen business up to where we were in California, Colorado, Wisconsin, Texas, Indiana, North Carolina, Florida, North Dakota, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts. But the PA plant became our largest screen plant by far. And of course, it's still out there, it's right screen today. And so Capital was our base customer. That brought us here. And once we got Capital, then we got it going, and we started expanding to other customers. It all worked out pretty good. And let me see if I can find my spot here. And I do remember, it was very interesting. When, Home Depot is now where Capital used to be on the Carlisle Pike, and on the left-hand side as you're heading towards Carlisle. Not very far from the Harvey Taylor Bridge, really. And and I do remember the first ride up from Harrisburg to here, and coming over, over Peters Mountain, and then the Singing Bridge at the bottom. I remember all that very well. And when we moved here, it was kind of unusual. I had a bit of a health problem going at the time. Had it was actually on this side, a big lump in my neck, and they thought it was Hodgkin's. And the first guy to operate got in and got scared, sewed it back up, and said, "We're going to have to get a different surgeon." And we didn't have insurance or anything. And Carol was pregnant with Randy, first kid. And anyway, the second guy was able to get it out without killing my facial nerve. All that stuff he made me sign scared the hell out of you. And but what's funny about it? It didn't have insurance. They knew he didn't have insurance. I didn't have insurance. So I think the operation probably took about 3 hours, and he charged $250. Today, with insurance, that would be $25 million or something. What it would be, some outrageous number. And our first meal in Eville was at the Washington Hotel, and that was when it was owned by Horace and Ann Schwartz. And there might be some people in here who remember them. And of course, her dad originally had the hotel. Not originally, I mean, had it before. I don't know who had it before him. He was still alive when I met him. And when we opened the plant, got going, we're probably going maybe a week or so. John Ralph came by, and if you remember the Elizabethville Echo, John was the publisher and operator of the Elizabethville Echo, and remember Sarah Ritz had the gossip column. But anyway, John came by and interviewed me and wanted to know how many employees I thought we would have. And I told him I thought by the end of the year that we hopefully would be up to 36 employees. In the Valley now, counting which we don't still own, Right Screen and MI Metals, there's probably around 1,800 at least, counting those two, maybe closer to 2,000. And it's amazing how we did beat the 36, and it took a while. And interestingly enough, Louis Kreutzer wouldn't let us have a charging account because the guy that was in the Romberger building before us was a mat company, and they hooked him. I don't know for how much, but they hooked him. So we thought anybody that goes in that building should not have credit. And of course, later we became very good friends. And probably nobody would ever remember this specifically, but I'll tell you that looking backwards, the 66, 67, and all this happened in June of 66. So June of 1966, I was 26, and that's when we came here. So that particular winter was a very cold, snowy winter. And that building, the heating system, didn't work real well. And so it was so cold in the building some mornings in February, we could not run the machines. We just couldn't get them started, they wouldn't go. So the grease was freezing up and whatever. That was interesting. We got it fixed for the next year. Well, we quickly kind of outgrew that building, and the first expansion was the building up here on Moore Street. And that Kenny Williams had owned it at that point, by that point. And he was building those apartments. Well, that came with that whole property when he bought it. That building has sort of the round roof, which is now a borough building, because we gave it to the borough. And so we had that building and for a couple of years, and then the original building out here where Light Screen is today, became available because Mr. Reichman, who was owner of Gordon Peters' brand of women's clothing, which most of which was being sewn right down here at Edridge. Not all of it, but a lot of it at Edridge. So it was the sewing operation for Gordon Peters. Mr. Reichman was getting about my age and old, and he wanted out, and so he was turning the business over to his kids, Marvin and Stuart, and he did not want them to have that big building. He said they don't need that. Business isn't that big anymore. So he sold that to us, and we moved out of Moore Street, and they rented that from Ken for a couple of years. And I think Mr. Reichman was right. They always weren't the best business guys. They didn't last too long. And then we ended up buying a building from Ken later on and using it again. It became our truck garage for a long time. And then I think over the years I counted up 6 expansions to that Elizabethville property. And I'll never forget Mr. Reichman was a very, very polished businessman and very well spoken man, not like his 2 kids. And he said, this will be the best investment you ever made in real estate. I think we paid $68,000 for that original building. And Upper Dauphin National Bank, Tom Miller, financed it 100%. We might have put 10%, but basically they financed 100%. They had a lot of faith in us. And so Tom Miller was really important to our success a couple of times over the years. Community, which then all the things, I don't even know what the hell we call them. It's Truist now, right? And they sold again. I think it's Truist now. Is actually, if they get around to renaming it. Yeah. Anyway, what used to be Millersburg Bank then, and then Upper Dauphin, really was very important to us over the years. They were great partners. The interesting thing is that when you look at the business, just up to this point, look how many times those 2 original partners, they had no problem with us doing things differently, no problem with changing things. That just seemed to be a part of their makeup. In 1972, a salesman called on us that I used to buy some screen mesh from, and he said one of our customers in Philadelphia was going out of all the fabricated products. So they made aluminum windows, they made aluminum storm windows, aluminum storm doors, and all that kind of stuff. And they had been sold to a French primary aluminum company that wanted nothing to do with finished products. They only really bought them because it came with a company out of Lancaster that owned them, that they wanted, the Lancaster company. They didn't really want the Philly thing. And so they were selling off all the production lines. And they had this guy from France there, Armand Bach. The guy told me, he said, if you want any of that stuff, call down there and ask for Armand Bach. Called down. I said, hey, I'd like to talk to you about one of the storm window lines. He said, well, understand, it's cash sale, and you have to buy all of our leftover raw materials, and then we'll give you a contract for the aluminum parts for 1 year. I said, okay. Now, it turned out to be a hell of a deal. We paid $7,850 to get in the storm window business. Brought all the stuff up here, and it was the middle of the winter, and we were outside pressure watching it because it was so dirty. We didn't want to bring it inside. But anyway, we got in the storm window business. Now, the important part of the 1972 part of that is that was the year of Agnes. And as a result of Nixon running for re-election, he started doing what FEMA does today, and that is throwing money around like crazy. And you could get free storm windows anywhere in Pennsylvania by just saying, oh yeah, we were Agnes affected. So people were buying storm windows like crazy, and we were going to find we're ready to make them. And then about that time, the energy crisis hit, and then there was pressure all over for storm windows and storm doors. And but keep in mind, if it would not have been for an election year when Agnes hit, and Nixon knowing that throwing money around would help him get reelected, we might not have FEMA today. It's just stupid how some of these things get started, And the storm door business came along 2 years later when we ended up realizing that the same people that we were selling, dealers that we were selling storm windows from needed or wanted storm doors. And we got in the storm door business. And we really did very well in both storm windows and storm doors for a lot of years. Our biggest customer was Heckingers, which was a precursor to Home Depot, and they were very strong in the Middle Atlantic region. Family company, third generation did run it into the ground. It's very simple. The first one built it, second one grew it, third one ruined it. It's a classic. I consider Mike and Matt my second. They're second generation. They're not the third, because the Walker Word Group never had anything to do with the window business. I mean, they would just come up here and go. Didn't know anything about it. Just write the checks. So it's interesting because ultimately that whole complex out there on 209 got so busy because we were making storm windows, storm doors, prime windows, vinyl windows, all kinds of stuff, and it just got overcrowded. So we moved storm windows to what is now the engineering building up in Gratz, and then we moved storm doors to Higgins. That's how we ended up in Higgins, storm door, because the building was available in that Schuylkill County Industrial Development Authority made a real attractive offer to get us there. Well then, about 1981, most of our storm window, storm door customers were looking at vinyl replacement windows. Vinyl replacement windows were just coming into the marketplace. People were starting to replace windows, and vinyl was definitely the way to go. And so we said, well, we got to get in that business. So one of our aluminum extrusion suppliers had designed a vinyl replacement window because they saw this as maybe taking precedence, or that aluminum would start fading down and vinyl would start going up, and they wanted to be on the upswing. So they developed this what we thought was really a cool window, and the deal was, if you bought the materials from them, they would also help you with the equipment that you needed to make these. So, sounded like a good idea. So we followed up with that. And it obviously became a big deal with us. And then what happened was, we bought, there was a company up in Scranton making that exact same window that we were gonna make. So we went up there and bought one and took it to Heckingers and said, look, hey, we're making these. And you guys need to put these in the store, because the same, you're able to sell stock size storm windows because most of the houses built in your marketplace are post World War II houses with stock size windows. Where if you go back prior to World War II, there weren't any stock size windows. Every town had their own little millwork house, and they made windows whatever size you wanted. But after World War II, literally millions of homes were built with stock size windows. So I said, the same window that you can sell a storm window for out of a stock, you can sell a replacement window for of course 4 times as much money. And so you need to stock these things. And they said, yeah, okay, we can get it. So they gave us a huge order for all the stores. Well, we hadn't made any yet. So Jeff Paradise, I said, we went out to plant, I said, I need somebody that's gonna be the on the floor foreman to help set this department up. And Jeff Paradise stepped forward and said, I want to do that. And so, Jeff just retired, and he was our VP of Ops. And Jeff, he grew with that business while they grew, and it was quite an experience. So he was our man. And we made the windows. We had to learn how to make insulated glass. I'm sure we made a lot of glass. It didn't last as long as it's supposed to. Everybody did. And nobody had the testing equipment, everything that we have today. Most people that were making insulated glass up to about 10 years ago had no clue how long it would last. And what happens is, the seal breaks down, and then you get moisture between the glass. Today, I'd say most of the people making insulated glass have enough testing equipment and enough knowledge, and there's enough knowledge in the industry to make it where it will last. But in the early days, it was a crapshoot. So the interesting thing about that Heckinger deal, that program was such a big success for them that the next year when they had their big vendor meetings and all that, they introduced us and gave us the Vendor of the Year award. And I did tell the story at that meeting with all those other suppliers and executives and all sitting there. I did tell the story that we had never made one when they gave us the award. And the guy that was Richard England, who was the son-in-law of the founder, came up to me and he said, if you have any more stuff like that, be sure and bring it to us first. Anything you tell me I should do, I'll give it a shot. So in the 80s, we had a big change in the energy codes all around the country, and more aluminum windows were starting to get pushed out of the market because they wouldn't, in northern climates, they wouldn't meet the new energy codes. And so then that vinyl really started to catch on. At the same time that was happening, the wood window guys ran into a problem where a bunch of the wood window guys that were making windows for the southeast market, which would be the Washington, D.C., Maryland, all the way down into Georgia, not Florida, mainly just Georgia up through Washington, D.C. The windows that they were making, most of them were using this composite sill that they started to rot, and within a year, and there was thousands of them out there, and these builders were having to replace these windows. So they really got unhappy with the whole idea of wood windows. They didn't want to go back to aluminum because they really couldn't meet the energy code. So the only alternative was vinyl at the time. Vinyl windows for new construction. Bingo. That was about 1989. We designed a vinyl window for new construction. And we were just starting to get going with it. Capital, meanwhile, had been sold to Ethel Corporation, Ethel Gas. And Ethel had gotten disenchanted with it, wanted to sell it off, so we bought their aluminum window production equipment, moved it to Georgia where they were to service Georgia and North Florida, where there was still a market for aluminum windows. In fact, South Florida is still moved that down there. And then the vinyl thing, I mean, up here, all of a sudden we were getting orders, I mean, for vinyl windows we couldn't even begin to make. We literally almost were throwing them up the stairs, and we'd go to the top of the stairs and make those first. And just, oh my God, it was just unbelievable. And so then we rented the Playtimer building and put another production line down there, and we were working night and day, and we were having a hard time keeping up, which is what's happening today too. But anyway, that vinyl window thing caught on just like that. It was almost overnight. And really, the vinyl new construction window today is, even in Florida, except for Southeast Florida, it's the predominant window for new construction. Probably not in a $3 million home, but 1.2 million down for sure. It's vinyl, and so that's the majority of them. It's unfortunate that Capital kind of let that business. The founder died at 49. The company had been sold, and they never really did well without him. That is like they should have. MI. So how did we get started in MI Profiles, and how did MI Metals, which is now Mountain Ridge, get started? Now the whole deal there was when we were making storm doors and storm windows, and we were using so much aluminum. We used to buy from Capital. They had a huge aluminum operation, and we bought from this other outfit in Eastern Ohio. They just couldn't keep up with us, because so we ended up running that thing. Really, we were running that 6 days a week, 20 hours a day, 2 10-hour shifts, just for ourselves. And then the same with plastics runs 24/7. It never shuts down. And that's, again, the people supplying our plastic, the guy that's put us in the business, they couldn't keep up with us. And I said, you're killing us. And they finally said, if you want to do it yourself, go ahead. We don't care. So we did. And how did we find out how to do that? That's another story. I got to tell the stories here, because these things all have a story. First of all, the aluminum extrusion business, the first aluminum extrusion press we had there came from Belgium, but it was made in Bellefonte, PA, and shipped over and sold to a company in Belgium. They ran it for 1 year, lost money, shut it down. It sat there for 2 or 3 years. We found it, hired a team to take it apart and put it on a ship, bring it over. They brought it into the wrong port, couldn't get it off the boat because the port didn't have a big enough crane. And I think they had to move the boat over to New Jersey someplace and got it off. Anyway, they got it up here, and we hired a guy to put it together for us, and he ended up Lionel Gray. He put that thing together and ran that business for us for several years, and until he retired. The plastics business, I was out in the plant one day walking around checking on things, and I got a call. This is before you had cell phones and all this, so somebody paged me. I went to the phone, picked it up. It was a guy named Tom Ross. Tom Ross says, hey, I understand you're in the vinyl window business. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, he said, if you don't know me, my company, Roscom, sells you all your little pellets that you use to make your soft vinyl parts, the screen spline and the bud strip and the stuff that goes around the glass and all that soft vinyl we were making ourselves. And he said, I'm the guy. He said, I bought all my machinery from these guys in Italy. And he said, if you agree to buy your pellets for your rigid vinyl to make your own frames, I'll introduce you. If you buy those from me, I'll take you over to Italy and introduce you to the guys who can put you in that business. It'll be turnkey. You won't pay them all the money until it's up and running. Well, we did. We went to Italy. Jim Leitzel and I went over there, made several trips. And they sent the machines over here, set them up. The guys, it was a funny story there. The guys that were here running them, you know, Italians like to drive fast. I mean, fast cars is a way of life in Italy. I mean, they got all really worked up when they put in their 84 mile an hour speed limit. And at the same time, we had a 55, they had an 84. And they weren't about to abide by it. So the guys that came over, they spoke, you know, reasonable English, certainly better than my Italian. And they got all the machines running. And so I had them over for dinner one night, and I had a little Mustang convertible with a little V8 engine in it. I said, "You guys want to take that for a spin?" Yep. They took a 209. He came back, I don't know, half hour later or whatever, said, "You know, at 120, the top rattles." I didn't know that. That does. I don't really care. So, but you know, that first year or so when we had the plastic extruders, I think we may have run 500,000 pounds. I think that plant now runs somewhere between 30 and 50 million pounds a year. And you buy another 30 or 50 million from another company, and then we have another company in California we own that runs another 30 or 50. So we run a lot of vinyl. Dave Kuppenhaver runs that plant now. Dave started with us right when we first got into that vinyl business, and kind of taught himself how to run those machines and how to set them up, how to tune the dies, how to make them work. And he's just a great guy. So that, you know, the 90s and the early 2000s did bring a lot of change and growth to MI. I mean, we expanded our vinyl window production to Texas, Indiana, North Carolina, Georgia, and Tennessee. We purchased General Aluminum Corporation in Carrollton, Texas, excuse me, and we purchased a Betterbilt window company in Smyrna, Tennessee, and Prescott Valley, Arizona. We sent Mike to jail, to Prescott, Arizona. I said, if you're going to have a place out west, you got to have a boss out west. And so Mike volunteered, and they've been there 15, 16, 17 years. 20 years, geez, long time flies. His kids have all grown up in Prescott. Mike's wife is a doctor there, and so Prescott is home for them. And Prescott is a really neat place. And I told Mike, really, you should take less money for salary because it's so nice to live. So in that year, in that time frame, you know, we got out of the storm window and storm door business to concentrate on new construction windows because that really was a growth product for us. And we did kind of let the replacement window business flounder a little, much like we had done the same thing to the screen business. You know, we started paying too much attention to one thing. So, and the next thing that happened was, about 1997, 96, we, meaning myself and two partners, one was the owner's original Toki Walker's daughter, and another guy like me who'd worked there his whole life, bought the company from Mr. Walker. The other guy had already sold out and actually had passed away. So I said, okay, we bought the company. I said, we're going to break the company up. Plastics is going to be a separate business. Extrusion is going to be a separate business. Right screen is going to be separate. Windows is going to be separate. And that grill and register thing, those types or whatever, is going to be separate. Everything's going to be separate. So that each one can have a president, each one can grow their own business, and you know, we'll be the overseers, but they're going to run the business. That worked really well, and then the recession hit, 2008, and you know, most all of our businesses were tied to new construction or remodeling, more to new than remodeling, but really about 85% new, 15% remodel. So, I mean, when that market crashed overnight, our business dropped in half overnight. So then it was, okay, now it's survival time. And we did several things to survive, some of which were very unpleasant. The most unpleasant thing was closing plants. you know, these very same plants that I'd gone and opened and welcomed the people and, you know, blah, 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 we had to go and say, I'm sorry, but we have to close. And what we needed to do, we needed to consolidate, so we kept, of course, Pennsylvania was our home at that point. As far as the window business goes, that was our home. And then we kept Prescott, and we kept Texas, sort of. We had 2 operations in Texas and consolidated into one. And everything else, you know, took the hit as far as the window business goes. Screen business, we closed probably only 2 or 3 operations. They're smaller, easier, less fixed cost. And, but we did what we had to do. So when you close a plant, you take all those raw materials and you move them to a plant that's still operating, right? So you don't have to buy new ones. You just, what you're doing is reducing your need for cash. And that's what we did. We reduced our need for cash. There's a little sidelight here that's not really funny, but it is a sidelight. Our main bank was Wachovia Bank. Wachovia was in the process of going bust themselves. And they were being taken over by Wells Fargo. The guy that was in charge of our account was about 55 years old, had all of his retirement in Wachovia stock. That stock had gone from like $40 to $1.50. I mean, his retirement was down the tubes, I mean, just like that. And so he was frantic. He wasn't paying attention to what we were doing. He was trying to figure out a way to save his savings and his retirement. And you can't blame him. At 55, it's hard to recover. And so I read in the Wall Street Journal where all the big companies were taking their line of credit away from their primary bank. They were drawing it down to 0 and moving that money to another bank, so that the bank that they had the loan from couldn't say, well, we're going to cut your line of credit, because they already had it. They just moved it out, moved the money out and said, we'll pay the interest. I did the same thing. I took our money out of Wachovia, drew our line of credit down to 0, put it over Bank of America, and they thought we were broke. And the insurance company, we also had some bonds with insurance companies, and they called up and they said they wanted their money in it. And we had never missed a payment. We weren't late on any payments. It doesn't matter. When they decide there's a reason they call your loan, you're going to have to find a way to pay it. And so we had to pay off the insurance companies. So M&T became our new bank, and they were our primary bank all the way up to a year ago. And great bank, great people, and we were lucky. It just worked out, because a lot of people in our business went down the tubes. When we moved all the material to other plants, of course, we had to buy less and equipment. We moved all the equipment from closed plants that we could possibly use in existing plants, so that we didn't have to spend money on any new equipment. And we did everything to conserve cash. Fortunately, in 2006, we had hired a guy to help us redesign our replacement window. We wanted to really start putting more emphasis back in that market. And so during 2008-9, we really started, working harder at getting back in the replacement window business. And today, our replacement window business is it's about 50-50. We're about half replacement and half new construction. So that's how we got through the recession. After the recession, my 2 partners wanted out. They said, we've had enough. We can't tolerate this, and we should have sold before the recession. I said, well, maybe you should have. So I said, well, we really can't sell this company as a whole. Nobody will buy a company that's made up of corrugated boxes, aluminum extrusions, window screens, patio screens, or you want to call them screens, new construction windows, replacement windows, grills, registers, and diffusers. I mean, Nobody will buy that because they don't understand it. And they're not gonna, they just, the only way you can sell this is in pieces. And when we became partners, the three of us, we agreed that our goal was gonna be to create opportunities and grow. Okay, of course, we didn't grow during the recession, but we did all the other times, and we have since. I said, if we're gonna create opportunities, the people that are running these different divisions ought to be first on the list to buy them. We ought to be chance. So, the corrugated box guy, we made a deal with him to buy it, finance it for him. He's the only one that failed. He was a great guy. He just didn't know how to run the business, and he wouldn't listen. He ended up selling it to his best customer, so he ended up okay financially, but he didn't make near as much money as if he would have run the business and sold it, as a profitable business. Right screen, the only reason Robert Williams, who was president, and Sam Sillinger, Robert A. Sillinger, real name, Sam, everybody called him Sam. The only reason they didn't buy it is Robert had a health issue, which he struggled for 2 years trying to figure out what it was. Ultimately, it unfortunately took his life at a very young age, and he just didn't feel like rightly so, he couldn't do it. And Sam didn't want to do it without Robert. So that got sold to a totally different group, an investor group. And they still own it, and they've done pretty well with it. And they're not bad guys. Of course, Mountain Ridge, MI Metals, the two guys running it bought it. They ended up not agreeing on what the future should be, so they split it again. And Kevin kept this, and the other guy kept the other locations. And it's fine. And they're doing well. You can see they're adding on, they're building a whole new building, and they're doing really well. Kevin's done really well. And my windows and doors, kids beat me out of it. Yeah, I think you left me 2%. I hooked them though now. I make them pay for a pilot for me. And of course, I wish I had never gotten old, so I could stay and be a part of each one of these businesses. I loved every one of them. I loved going to work. I loved doing that stuff. It was my life, probably more of my life than it should have been. And anyway, that's the way it was. Matt and Mike certainly, and their team, have done one hell of a job with MI Windows and Doors. MI Windows and Doors now is, I think I'm talking out of line here, is well over $1 billion. It's a huge company. They have plants in Washington, Oregon, California, Arizona, Michigan, Texas, and here. And probably not too long future, we'll have one down south again, hopefully. And since the boys have been running it, they have purchased 2 other window companies that have ended up so they purchased Milgard Manufacturing, which is a very well-known, actually branded company out west, and where MI really doesn't have any brand recognition, except for the builders. And we bought that from Masco, which is a New York Stock Exchange company. And then we recently bought a smaller window company in Michigan called Sunrise. And our goal there is to expand them enough to take over our Midwestern replacement window business so that we have a lot of opportunities here in the East we haven't been able to do because we just can't make anymore. And right now the Prescott, Arizona plant will become a Milgard plant. Mike is orchestrating that transition. And Milgard is a wonderful brand name out west, actually better known than Anderson here in the East. And it was a family company. Jim and Gary Milgard built that business. Anyway, they, while they are a great marketing company, they're not near the production company that MI is. We are super good at production. And so we're in the process of working with them to improve their production. And I think they've taught us a few things on marketing, on how to charge a lot more than you need to. Anyway, they're good at that. As you know, right now, we're adding on to Gratz, and it's a big project. I think it's the third time we've added to Gratz, and this is the end. Can't grow anymore, Gratz. We're up against the road, unless we buy the road back. And I'm the guy that forced Gratz to pave that road for us. I don't know if they're willing to give us the road, maybe for enough money. But the Gratz plant, I'll tell you a little something about Gratz plant. It just, there's a lot of window plants, and I've been, hanging around window plants as a screen guy, or now as a window guy. And I've gone into a lot of companies that we've looked at acquiring and everything. Nobody beats that Gratz plant. And now Higgins is right up there close to them. That is just an amazing, they have some production lines in that plant that will make more than 100 windows an hour. I mean, they just crank them out. That team is an amazing team to operate. And it's the least automated of any of our plants. It's getting better. We are investing in it, but for the longest time, they were the last ones to get all the new stuff because they were so good they didn't need it. But now they're finally getting some of the new stuff. I just like to mention a couple things that I haven't talked about yet. The Gratz manager is a guy named Lynn Harder, and he's a homegrown PA guy. And by the way, he had college education. He didn't go to Harvard or Yale or any of that shit. He just learned how to do the stuff that we need him to do, And he's not only good at it, he's probably the best. Jeff Paradise started as a screener, and he ended up VP of Ops. Jeff grew when the job grew. He grew with it, and he just retired. And I miss Jeff already. Just he and I did so many things together, so many nights, so many just learning this business. Brett Erdman, the manager of Higgins, is a homegrown PA guy. J.R. Minnick, manager of our largest plant, which is in Flower Mound, Texas. 476,000 square feet. It's 100,000 square feet bigger than the expanded Gratz plant is going to be. And JR, of course, in fact, JR's grandmother really raised Matt. Because Carol was working and I was, by the time Matt came along. Steve Morgan just retired from Higgins. He's a homegrown PA guy. I told you about Dave Kuppenhaber. Mike Silks, who just retired as production manager of the right screen operation, homegrown PA guy. Sharon Chevrolet is still there in charge of customer service. Sharon started with me in 1968 and she was 17. And she used to come to work after school and work until maybe 5:30 or so, or Dad would pick her up and take her home. And Sharon's been with me out long. And now I forgot her married name. It's not Chevrolet, of course.
Sprower.
Yeah, that's it. You remember. I knew you'd remember. Thank you. I felt terrible that I couldn't remember her maiden name. Stan Sullivan, our senior VP of sales, started with us right out of college. Of course, now he's an old guy and his kids are out of college. And so he's been with us all that time. Been an amazing guy, really. Jason Wolfgang, our current VP of Eastern Ops, which is all the plants here in PA and Texas. Yeah, that's considered East, believe it or not. He's a homegrown PA guy. I just one other thing, I want to brag one time. I don't like bragging normally, but I will tell you that I know of at least 20 people who have become millionaires because of their association with MI. I am so proud of that. It's unbelievable. And I'm not including me in the 20. And, I certainly came here with nothing. So Eville means a lot to me. there are literally thousands of people making a decent living here in the Upper Norfolk County because MI came to town. And since this is the Historical Society, I thought I would just go down memory lane just a little bit here at the end. And so, number one, I already said about Ann and Horace Schwartz ran the Hotel Washington, which they had taken over from Ian's parents. Earl Romberger, this is when I came to town. Earl Romberger had the little grocery store where Cuppy's is now. Earl Romberger smoked up to the day he died. When they told me he had lung cancer, he said, well, I guess there's no sense quitting now. He never would go to the hospital, he died at home. I mean, they may have taken a hospital on the last day or something. He just said, what the hell? You know, I'm done. Ma'am Schumann had a little store right across the square, where it's actually a vacant lot now, but where the Troutman has their insurance sign. It was a drugstore without drugs. All she had was old stuff. They didn't have anything new you could buy. You could go in there and buy a toothpaste tube that was, 12 years old. It was funny.
And ice cream.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Ice cream.
Yeah.
She licked the difference.
Oh my God.
Yeah, everybody knew that.
Can you imagine what Ma'am Schumann's would have been like if they'd have legalized marijuana? Yeah.
You missed J.B. Rouse. We surely have a story about him.
I do have one.
Okay.
Well, I did mention that he owned the newspaper.
Oh, yes.
My favorite story about J.B. Ralph, well, first of all, he had a really cute wife, which always amazed me because John was not the most, he was not really let's put it this way, he didn't really dress very well. He just, he was pretty rough looking. My favorite story about him was he had a German Shepherd dog. And, the house he lived in down there with next to Klinger Lumber, well, not Klinger Lumber anymore, but whatever. The dog had run under the house, and he decided to go under the porch part of the house, not before you get to the basement, of course. The porch is just off the ground, right? So he's crawling under there after that dog, and the dog came after him. I guess, and he literally ripped clothes off himself getting out of there as that dog was coming after him. But of course, God knows John may have been half looped when he did it. So, number 4 on my list is the Rotary Club was still raising money to pay off the community pool, which of course now they want the town raise money to fill the pool with dirt. Back then there was a town cop, and I forgot his name. Mike. That's it, yep. Yep. Home Reserving had a store right across the alley from our first plant.
Hoagies.
Yes.
Yeah. Homer was a good guy. Schwab Wagon sold Chrysler, Plymouth, and Dodge cars. And if you needed gas, anything afternoon on Saturday, you had to know somebody at Schwab Wagon. Because there was no other place to get gas. And of course, Schwab Wagon was making the same thing you're making today, I think. Ambulance bodies.
Everything. I was told today that they're visitor now, and they've been a long time.
Yeah, that's great.
Yep.
That's great. I think then you were still making the kennel trucks too, which I don't know if you're making those anymore.
Yeah, they're making golf wagons.
Okay,
That's what
okay,
we
I didn't
call
know. Yeah. Fred Cucker was just opening his IGA. Daimler's drugstore had a soda fountain. Don, when he took over the store, he got rid of that. Bummer. That ruined the store. Earl Klinger had just barely started his lumber yard. I put John Ralph owned the Echo, and Sarah Ritz had the Gossip Column. And Fred Lunt had just moved to town, back to this area, because Pat, remember, she had desert fever, or whatever they call it.
Yep.
And so they had to move away from the desert. They moved in Arizona. And Fred needed a job, so he was running the linotype down at Elizabethville Echo. And draft beer at Legion and Flips was 10 cents. And I know that for sure because within a couple of years after I got here, I was manager of the Legion, and I raised it to 15 cents. I was losing money, and they damn near ran me out of town. You cannot imagine the amount of grief I got over that. You greedy SOB. It's not for me. I don't get anything. I'm doing this for nothing. And of course, Swab Wagon, as we all know, was here then and is here now. And the other, they used to call North Penn High the Stink Factory. And that's when it took me a while to figure out what that was, and then I soon found out. Ned Rich was here in town, and it was owned by Ned and Rich Weaver, and their dad had started it originally. And they were busy. They were busy all the time. And there was another sewing factory down on Broad Street, which I think it's a church now, right? Jehovah's Witness or something. I don't know who used it now. Or did it become something else after that?
Auto parts now.
Okay. Oh, wow. Well, that's cool. And Willie's was kind of a sports bar at the end of town. And the reason it was a sports bar is because the coaches from Upper Dauphin High School used to hang out there. And North Penn High was probably the biggest business in town. I don't know, step between them and Swamp Wagon, I'm not really sure. And, they probably looked bigger because they had all those trucks. And, Crosser Hardware was about 1/4 the size it is now. Broad Street School was still there. In fact, all my kids went to Broad Street, all three of them. The Hollywood Movie Theater was still there, and they actually still showed movies from time to time back then. Now they built apartments there. And the train was still coming to town. In fact, Klinger Lumber used to get their lumber off the train and bring them unloading it. And there were no apartments, really, in all of Upper Dauphin area back then. Really, Kenny Williams guy who built apartments here. You know, when you look at that around town. And there were no fast food restaurants, and no Walmart, no YMCA, no library, and no Amish buggies either. So you could speed on the back roads. You can't do that now. My last comment is, I think the most important. When we lived in St. Louis for a year prior to coming here, and we lived in this little neighborhood that was all people about our age, because it was a bunch of rental duplex homes. And so, you know, it was relatively new, and mostly young married couples were renting or lived there, and then about half of them had little toddlers, and half were hoping to have little toddlers. But they all said, you're going to hate it there because the people there will not welcome new outsiders, and you'll have a hard time making friends there and all that. Well, I can tell you they were 100% wrong. Eville and Millersburg turned out to be wonderful places to live, and I feel we were very lucky that we were able to raise our family here. This is truly a special place. It is. Very special people here. And they were so good to us, I just can't say enough. This town means the world to me. So I hope I covered a lot of junk here. I hope I didn't bore you too much. I went to a meeting one time, and Herb Kohler, the patriarch, if you will, of Kohler, well, he would be the second or third generation of Kohler, the bathroom stuff. It was probably the most boring thing I ever heard in my life, so I hope I didn't bore you as bad as he did.
Look behind you. Look at the pictures up there.
Yeah.
Schumann's,
Yeah.
Romberger's, Schwartz.
Yeah.
Should have called him when we were writing the history book.
Yeah, we should have.